Hey, I'm Stephen, Senior Pastor at Cokesbury Church. I want to welcome you in from wherever you're watching. We'd love to connect with you, and so if you want to jump in the chat, we'd love to start a relationship with you. You can ask questions, you can make comments, and that's a great way for you and I to be able to experience this moment together. We're in this series called The Greatest Story, and we're working our way through the Christmas story, which is great because Christmas Eve is right around the corner. Today, I want to continue that thought and start with a promise that was made by the prophet Isaiah a long time ago. The people of Israel found themselves in a situation where their back was against the wall and they weren't really sure what their next step was. And so this really brave prophet named Isaiah, God raises him up and he's got a word of hope for a people who were living in darkness. And in Isaiah chapter 7, he says this, "Therefore, the Lord himself will give you a sign. Look, the young woman is with child and shall bear a son and shall name him Emmanuel." And then he goes on in chapter 9. "The people walking in darkness have seen a great light. On those living in the land of deep darkness, a light has dawned. For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. And he will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the greatness of his government and peace, there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over his kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forever." And so sort of that key phrase right there is, "You shall name him Emmanuel," which means God with us. And today I want to focus on just one simple word. It's that word with. Not God above us, not God watching over us, or even God all around us, but literally God with us. And maybe the reason that resonates with so many of us this time of year is that we know that part of being alive, part of being a human being means that there are going to be these moments where you and I find ourselves completely alone. There'll be moments, there'll be circumstances, maybe even entire seasons that you and I are going to have to walk through where we feel like we're completely alone. And here's what I know about every single human being, that nobody wants to admit that we're alone. We already know, right? That nobody wants to be that kid that is sitting in the school cafeteria who's having to eat lunch by themselves. And here's what you may not know. I was that kid. I'm an introvert. I wrestle with social anxiety on a lot of different levels. And on top of that, when I was in the 4th grade, I was almost 6 feet tall. Now, when you're in high school, being a guy my size, that's really awesome. But when you're at least a foot taller than most people and you're in the 4th grade, it's awful. The kids called me Bigfoot. I spent most of my recesses by myself because nobody would play with me. And almost every single day of the 4th and 5th grade, I had to eat lunch completely alone. When I think about this idea of being alone, especially when you're a kid, I always think of this scene from a great movie. It's this one right here.
You do your very best now, Forrest.
I sure will, Mama.
I remember the bus ride on the first day of school very well.
Are you coming along?
Mama said not to be taking rides from strangers.
This is the bus to school.
I'm Forrest Gump.
I'm Dorothy Harris.
Well, now we ain't strangers anymore. Slate's taken. Taken. Can't sit here.
You know, it's funny what a young man recollects, 'cause I don't remember being born. I don't recall what I got for my first Christmas. I don't know when I went on my first outdoor picnic, but I do remember the first time I heard the sweetest voice in the wide world.
You can sit here if you want.
I had never seen anything so beautiful in my life. She was like an angel.
Well, are you gonna sit down, aren't you? What's wrong with your legs?
I'm nothing at all, thank you. My legs are just fine and dandy.
I just sat next to her on that bus and had a conversation all the way to school.
My back's crooked like a question mark. These are gonna make me
And
as
next
straight
to Mama,
and narrow. They're
no
my
one ever
magic
talked to
shoes.
me or asked me questions.
Are you stupid or something?
Mama says stupid is as stupid does.
I'm Jenny.
I'm Forrest Gump.
From that day on, we was always together. Jenny and me was like peas and carrots.
That's a great movie, right? There's Forrest. He gets on the school bus and nobody wants to let him sit beside them. And you kind of begin to feel the pain of his being alone until this girl named Jenny says, "You can sit next to me." And then he's not alone anymore. He's actually with her, right? And from that point on, Jenny becomes like an angel to him. See, Christmas, it's all about being with friends, being with family, going to holiday parties, sending out what used to be Christmas cards but are now Facebook posts of amazing holiday experiences that'll make other people feel as lonely as you feel when you look at their amazing holiday posts. And yet for a lot of people, we've gone through loss or maybe a breakup. Or maybe we faced illness, or we're battling depression, or maybe we find ourselves in a season whereas no matter how hard we try or how hard we long for, we're unable to have children. Or maybe we're in a situation where we're looking for a relationship, or maybe we just sort of feel alone for some reason that we don't even know. It's true, Christmas can be one of the loneliest times of the year. Maybe that's where you find yourself. I have a feeling this Christmas is going to be different for a lot of us. Sometimes we think our loneliness is something that maybe another person can take away from us. So if we find ourselves feeling lonely during Christmas, maybe what that really means is we just haven't found the right person to share it with, right? An icon and a theologian in his own right by the name of Elvis Presley put it like this: "I'll have a blue Christmas without you." Now, I don't want to go any further without just sort of making a side comment, because it's just us, right? I can't stand Elvis music. Like, that song literally makes my skin crawl. But it does point to something really important. There is a kind of aloneness that is so deep that no other human being can actually take it away. One of the first times I thought about that, and at least for me, one of the most powerful and poignant moments I ever had as a parent, was when our first child was born. And I held him in my arms for the very first time. And if you've been there, you know that flood of emotions that come over you in the moment, right? You got joy. At least for me, there was a certain amount of shock. There was a lot of fear that started to come in. But basically, I stared down into the eyes of my child, and there was just this profound sense of awe. But then all of a sudden it occurred to me that there was an aloneness that I could not shelter him from. It would one day strike him in times of pain or in the passage of time or in death itself. And I honestly hadn't expected this. It was like the whole arc of his life flashed before my eyes in that moment. And I said to my wife, I'm like, "Beth, this is so unbelievable to me that right now this little baby I'm holding in my hands is gonna grow up. And one day he's gonna grow old, and this pink, beautiful, smooth, perfect skin that I'm holding, one day it's gonna be all wrinkled." And I looked down and I saw his blonde hair, and I'm like, this blonde hair, it's gonna turn gray. And then I was hit with that reality. You and I are gonna grow old and we're gonna die. And then he's gonna grow old and he's gonna die. This baby I'm holding right now, I'm gonna die. And I promise you guys, Beth is like, "Give me that baby, you're creeping him out," right? Some of the most influential thinkers in the last century have argued that loneliness is an inevitable human condition. One philosopher put it like this: the reason we're lonely is that we are meaning-seeking creatures, but we live in a meaningless world. Biologist and scientist Richard Dawkins wrote a few years ago, "The reason we're lonely is that the universe offers no design, no purpose, no hope, just blind, pitiless indifference." Isn't that wonderful? Joseph Conrad once wrote that we live as we dream, alone. Now, the story of Christmas claims that things are not that way. It reminds us that you and I were actually made by God, that God literally hates loneliness. God says at the very beginning of the human story that it is not good for people to be alone, which that means God doesn't want anybody sitting at the table by themselves in the cafeteria. In fact, the central theme of the Bible is God's desire to be with people. An Old Testament scholar counted 114 times in the Hebrew scriptures where God says to his people, I'll be with you. Don't be afraid. You don't have to go through your life feeling alone. God gives them all these pictures of his presence, and he even has them build a temple, right? Where he says, I'm gonna be with you so I can hear your prayers. I'll be there to receive your worship. I'll be there to offer you guidance. When you open up the scriptures, you'll find me right there among the words. It's almost as if that's not enough to satisfy God. So he finally says, I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go down there and I'm gonna be with those people myself. Now, John writes about this far more eloquently than I ever could. In the very first chapter of his gospel, the story of Jesus, he writes this: in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness will not overcome it. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. That's Jesus. That's Christmas, y'all. When the biggest miracle of all is also the smallest. Think about it in that moment. God causes all of his person, all of his presence, all of his majesty, all of his power to be condensed and compacted into one little human body. And he goes down to earth to be with people, starting with this impoverished girl named Mary and her family. The scriptures say this: an angel comes and speaks to Mary, and he says, you will conceive and give birth to a son, and you are to call him Jesus. He'll be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. The Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. Why? Because Jesus is Emmanuel, God with us. And here's what we need to know: that word with, it actually becomes Jesus' signature word. At the beginning of his ministry, we're told that Jesus takes a ragtag band of fishermen and tax collectors, and he appoints 12. He designates them as apostles. They're gonna be his disciples, his students, so that they can be with him. See, there's that word again. Later, we're told that the authorities were so struck by the power that being with Jesus had on those disciples, knowing they were unschooled, ordinary men, that they were literally astonished and took note that these are the people that had been with Jesus. All throughout his story, Jesus is with beggars, he's with lepers, he's with foreigners, he's with prostitutes, and he's with enemy soldiers. One time, they even called Jesus a friend of sinners, which they meant to be an insult, but I suspect for him, it was more like a badge of honor. See, that little word with is kind of what got Jesus killed, because he kept hanging out with the wrong people, scandalous people, and religious authorities hung him on a cross and he died. But then 3 days later, he was resurrected. And at the very end of the Gospel of Matthew, this little word comes back again. In the last promise that Jesus makes to his friends, he says, and surely I will be with you always, to the very end of the age. See, Jesus is saying, I am with you. That's the message of Christmas. Tomorrow morning, you can try this out when you wake up. You can just actually begin every single day simply by saying, Jesus, be with me. And here's the good news: he will be. He can be with you in your thoughts. He can be with you when you go to work. He can be with you in your family. He can be with you in your pain. He can be with you in all of your hopes. He can be with you through other people. He can be with you while you're taking classes online. Think about it. The sustaining power of the unseen presence of God has made the weak strong. Down through the centuries, it's that presence that has made the deathbed a place of triumph. It's what's brought hope to people in their old age. It's brought courage to people who are desperate. It's brought freedom to people who are addicted and could not get free any other way. It turns out that our loneliness, it's actually a clue about who we are. Just like the fact that we get hungry indicates that we were made to eat. And the fact that we get thirsty from time to time is an indication that we were made to drink. Our loneliness tells us that we were made for God and we were made to be with God. There's an old Beatles song, Eleanor Rigby, and it asks this haunting question. All the lonely people, where do they come from? Well, maybe the answer is they are people who live apart from God. And they are people who don't yet know his love. See, friends, the good news of Christmas is you don't have to go through life that way. You can actually ask Jesus to be with you. This is a great time to actually do that. You can ask him to forgive you for all the wrongdoing. You can ask him to wash away the stuff that you're embarrassed about, to take away the sin, the flaws that make us all hide from each other and make us isolated and feel like we're completely alone. He can give you a fresh start with his forgiveness. Maybe you're already a Christian and you've known God for a while, but maybe in this season, God feels like he's somewhere else on the other side of the universe. Here's the great good news of Christmas. You get to begin all over again with him right now. You can start to make space for him in your everyday life. Like, you can get help for this because there's another with promise from Jesus right in the middle of the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus says this, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I will be with them." Think about that. That's an amazing promise. Jesus is saying, I actually have a plan for loneliness. And his plan is that for those of us who are following him, we would create a community that is kind of a family that would embrace anybody who needs to be loved. Because God hates it when anybody sits alone in the cafeteria. It's very ironic to me that in our day, as modernization increases, poverty and illiteracy and disease apart from a pandemic are actually all going down. But loneliness is going up. Studies tell us that 3 out of 4 Americans right now, as you and I are going through this together, we're suffering from loneliness. Loneliness is so epidemic in Great Britain. Maybe you read this a couple of years ago. They actually appointed a cabinet-level government position called the Minister of Loneliness to try to address this problem. There's a whole field of treatment that's emerged over the last decade or so in psychology called pet therapy, right? We all know about pet therapy. Numerous studies have shown that the presence of animal companions can lessen the pain of isolation. A couple of Christmases ago, the star of the internet was a Dalmatian named Wiley. You remember Wiley? Wiley had a nose that's shaped like a heart. I mean, look at that dog right there. Who could resist that dog? Maybe you want to go out and buy your kids a dog this Christmas, right? It's interesting. We buy dogs or cats or rabbits or goldfish or emus or whatever it is to try to reduce loneliness. Because as a group, we are a lonely people. Jesus had a plan for this. That when tragedy comes, when a family loses a child or an aging person battles an illness or somebody loses a job or somebody goes through a divorce or somebody finds themselves at a moment in life when they feel completely rejected, Jesus' plan is that nobody stands alone. See, what we're involved in, even if it's online, it's a family. And Jesus is right here in the middle of it. And he has very good news. See, this is the message of Christmas, that God and sinners are reconciled, that Emmanuel, God is with you if you want him. God will be with you if you'll let him. God will be with you if you'll ask him into your life. See, that's the great good news of Christmas, that a child was born, that hope came to the world, that possibility gets opened up, that freedom is right at the tip of our finger, that new life and new understanding and new vitality are there because God is with us. Y'all, we're about 10 days away from Christmas. And it's gonna be a little different for everybody. But it's that moment where we remind ourselves that even in the darkness of this moment, that there's a reason to have hope. I hope that this week you'll experience at least one moment where you know beyond a shadow of a doubt that God is with you. But not that you'll just feel connected to God, but I hope that God will open up a door somewhere where you can be the answer for someone else, where you can come alongside them, where you can serve them, where you can love them, where you can figure out a way to reach out to them so that they too feel connected and you and I can be a part of the good news of Jesus. See, that's what it means to be with God. God is with us and we are with each other. And over time, that's what changes the world. So wherever you find yourself today, my prayer is that you'll experience God in a real intangible way. That if you're fighting loneliness, that someone will enter your life to help you push back against that pressure. And I hope that by the time we see each other again, that all of us will not have just captured a deeper sense of the Christmas spirit, but I hope that we'll experience the Spirit of Christ. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen.